Hey nerdy knitters, in this video we're looking at triangle shawls. We are going to discuss all the different ways that you can make them. Top down, bottom up, side to side, boomerang shawls, asymmetrical. We're going to cover all of them. And be sure to stick around because I have some book recommendations if you love to knit shawls. And first off, let's talk about the basic triangle shawl shapes. You can knit them from the top down, from the bottom up, or from side to side. That looks like this. If we started a top-down shawl, we'd start here and work out to the edges. If we were to knit one bottom up, you start at this point and work up to the top and bind off here. Or for side to side, one method is to start here and increase and end over here. And then we can take this one and turn it into a tip-to-tip shawl, which is the same method. We started here, worked here, but instead of binding off, now we decrease back down to the other edge. Now, there are lots of variations on these four basic patterns. You can make heart-shaped crescents, you can do asymmetrical, boomerang, all of these different things, but they all start with one of these basic shapes. Let's look at some shawls that use those constructions. First off, we'll start with the top-down triangle. This is a really popular one for especially beginner knitters who are just new to shawl knitting. This might be one of the first ones they tackle. There's this one. This follows that same construction method. This is the Grain Shawl by Tin Can Knits. I just changed the colors and added stripes down at the bottom. Something very different. That was garter stitch. This is a lace shawl. It follows the same construction. Top down, starts right there with the garter tab cast on, but it's lace. The same basic method, but two very different shawls. Now our second construction method, bottom up shawls. They start down here. You could cast on just a few and increase at the edges, or you could cast on the full amount and decrease down. Both of those methods will get you in that direction. Here's an example of that construction. It started right down here, and I worked increases on every row, right side and wrong side, and it creates a shallower triangle with longer wings. Next, we have those tip-to-tip shawls and the asymmetrical shawls. They start with this method. You cast on here, you work your increases and bind off. Or if you want a tip-to-tip shawl, you would continue that. Instead of binding off, you would work right to the end. This construction method is probably the most popular. Here is one example of the tip-to-tip. This one started right at the edge and had a border worked along one side and stockinette along the other, worked right to here, and then decreased down to the other end. This is an example of an asymmetrical shawl. It starts off right up here at this tip and works increases along one edge and decreases along the other to get the shape. It starts growing wider and wider until you have your triangle shape, and then one edge along that long edge, you'll bind off. So you get that asymmetrical triangle. Now this final shawl uses the same basic construction, but it changes where the increases and decreases are worked. You can see decreases are worked right here in the middle. That changes the look of this shawl. But all of these shawls use one of those four basic construction methods, but they're all completely different. Now in our upcoming videos, we're going to break down each of these shapes and how they can be used and changed and adjusted to create even more variations. What makes this really interesting is once you understand how to work these patterns, you can create your own custom shawl in really something as simple as 5 steps. The first step is choose the silhouette you want. You could start with one of the 4 examples I showed here, these little mini swatches. For example, if you wanted to start with a bottom-up triangle shawl. Say this is the silhouette you would want. The first thing you would think about is the main body pattern. What body pattern do you want to have in here? Do you want to have stockinette or garter? Do you want to add some lace or some cables? You would think about that and consider how it would fit into the shape of this shawl. Then you would also want to think about your edge stitches. what's going to happen here, especially if you're working in a primarily stockinette fabric. You need to have something along the edge to keep that fabric from curling in. Then once you've made those decisions, you can think about things like border stitches, knitting on a border, and think about your cast off. You want something that's probably more stretchy so your shawl can be stretched out, especially if it's a lace shawl. And the last thing to consider is the math. If you're using a stitch pattern, something like lace or cables, you want to see how they'll fit within the shape of that shawl. We're going to discuss all of these topics in upcoming videos, depending on the shape that you start with and how you can make adjustments and change that pattern. And if you have specific questions about how to use these shawl shapes to create your own designs, be sure to leave me a comment, tell me what your questions are, and I'll try to answer them in the upcoming videos. Now, along with those things to consider when you're designing your own shawl, you want to think about the drape of your shawl. If you want something that's really warm and comfy and cozy, you might want to knit it with a thicker yarn on smaller needles so it really has a tighter fabric that will keep you warm. But if you're knitting something lacy, you want it open and drapey and have really good flow. There's a couple of things to consider. The first is the yarn and the second is the needles. If you want a shawl that has some drape, think about the yarn that you're going to use and the fibers that are involved. Something like silk or alpaca has really good drape. Plant fibers have really good drape, so you might want to make sure some of that's included, even if you're using a primarily wool-based yarn. Now, if you still want to use wool, but you still want to have drape as well, the next thing you can do is choose larger needles. If the ball band recommends a certain size, go up a size or two and swatch and see if you get a fabric that you like. Now, I know we went through all of those steps really quickly, but that's really all it comes down to with knitting a shawl. Once you understand the basic construction, all of the other details can fall right into place. The hardest part will probably be the math and figuring out how to fit in your stitch patterns or your lace or cables, whatever you're using, how that will work within the pattern. But once you understand the construction, you're well on your way to figuring that out for yourself, and you can design your own shawls. Now, if you just prefer to knit from a pattern and you love shawls, I have some book recommendations for you. First of all is this one by Marie Green, Knit Shawls and Wraps in a Week. There's lots of great options in here. I really like this book. Another good one is Modern Shawls and Wraps. Sock yarn shawls is really good if you like top-down triangle shawls, especially. That most of the patterns in here are that construction. Now, if you like to explore the shape of shawls, but you're not quite ready to design your own, these next three are perfect for you. Shawls for All from Knit Picks. This one breaks everything down into steps. You choose the shape, and then it has the stitch patterns, the body patterns, and the edge patterns, and you just sort of mix and match and choose your own adventure kind of shawl. Knitting Modular Shawls by Melissa Leitman. This is a really good one. It's a really thick book and it covers a lot. She has lots of stitch patterns and everything, and really walks you through how to combine everything to create your own custom shawl. Last is Custom Shawls for Creative Knitters. This is another really good one. They explain the basic construction of all of the different shapes. They have stitch patterns and they have example shawls as well. I hope you can see how you can use these basic shawl shapes to create your own custom designs. In upcoming videos, we're going to take each of these methods and break them down and look at each step in the construction process so you can create your own custom shawls. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave them below and I'll try to address them in future videos. Give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe if you like to get nerdy with your knitting.